Welcome to the Thursday Checkdown. I'm your host, Greg Kellogg. I'm joined by a plethora of OGs from this hobby, but I'm also joined by my regular co-host, Tip Major. Tip, say hi to the fans. Tip, you're blocked. I can't hear a word you're saying. You check, make sure you're not muted, buddy. Yeah, he's still muted, guys. So if somebody can work on Tip's thing, we'll get that back and working. But I'm also joined by Bob Harris, Dan and Kelly Grogan, and we're going to explain who all these people are. We were supposed to be joined by Emil Kadlec today. Emil will not be joining us because of a doctor's appointment conflict, but we're going to do a tribute to Emil because he literally changed my life, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But first, I would like Bob to run with a little bit about Emil because he probably knows him better than any of us.
I do. Been working with him known him for 30 years and worked with him daily for the last 25. So, and in case people don't know, he's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It's a stage 4. He's working his way through it, battled through this season and, kept the side alive. And, it's one of those things where over the years you kind of stovepipe yourself into roles, right? And I have roles and he has roles and never the twain did meet. And, he had to get stuff done. We were able to get through the season, but he is now calling it a career and he's retired. And there'll be some news on the site going forward in the future. And, but he's, the magazines will change hands and things will go on, but without Emil. And then for that part of it, without me. But I wanted to introduce people maybe who don't really know what, don't know Emil, just know maybe the name or maybe don't even know the name. And so for those who don't know him, Emil founded Fantasy Sports Publications in 1990. And he started the Pro Forecast magazine the same year. You can see the magazines over my shoulder if I can point the right way, backwards. And it's been published consecutively since, every year since the Pro Forecast, 34 straight years. And over the course of time, it had been joined by 3 other titles, giving FSP the largest print distribution in the industry for a while there. In 2002, Emil founded the World Championship of Fantasy Football, the first and original high-stakes fantasy football event that earned him the 2018 Matthew Berry Game Changer Award. With a desire to raise the profile of content creators and, add a little something to the industry, Emil co-founded the Fantasy Sports Writers Association in 2004, subsequently inducted to that organization's Hall of Fame in 2011. More recently, Emil created Fantasy Nation, where he continued his long-standing ongoing efforts to document and promote the origins and history of the game and the fantasy sports community, a series of video interviews featuring pioneers in the industry. Some more than 30 of those videos, not just like old timers, but newcomers and, women who kind of broke into the industry and changed the way we view that and different things. So these are the things most of you know that Emil has done. Some other things, he created the first best ball league back in 1998. We were all in a league called the FanX League of Fantasy Experts. And we all, a group of us played, and we wanted to do one more draft and nobody wanted to manage their team. So we called it a draft mastery back then, but it was basically the first best ball. And so there's things most of you know. He and I did an article on the history of fantasy football, the origins. Wink, it's called The Nod and the Wink. And Bill Winkenbaugh was one of the originators back in the early 60s, 61. There was a league called the GOPL, the Greater Oakland Pigskins Prognosticators League. And I wrote the article, but Emil did all the damn legwork. And we talked to all the people involved in that were live. We obtained the original draft, handwritten draft, the original constitution for that league. The thing that struck me and how I wrote about it was the more things change, the more they stay the same. It was no different than the motivations and the kind of fun that we had, the kind of smack talk that you would hear just today, exactly the same back then. So Emil promoted that and put a big effort into getting Wink installed in the FSGA, FSTA, and FSGA Hall of Fame as well, which he did manage to get. I'd like to tell you some things you might not know because he's an interesting character as well. He worked his way through college in the mid-'70s, mostly at Red Top Records in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he developed a love of music and a knowledge of obscure 60s and 70s artists that he will break out on you at only the slightest provocation. You need to kill a couple hours, ask him about Russ Ballard and Argent, or Todd Rundgren, or Jeff Lynne of Electric Light Orchestra, and still settle in and prepare yourself. While amassing that,
Whose music's better than yours, Bob?
well, maybe. While amassing that arcane but vital body of musical information, Emil also earned a master's degree in electrical engineering in 5 years, graduating first in his class before spending the next 15 years working at a national lab, gainful employment as a nuclear scientist, which he left to work full time on the whole fantasy football thing, much to the consternation of friends and family who didn't know what the hell he was doing. Is he quirky? Yes, he is very quirky. He's a B-rated chess player, an amateur graphologist. Feel free to submit your handwriting for analysis. He can write as easily upside down as you and I can right side up. He's appeared in 2 episodes of Better Call Saul. Emil once took part in a bare-knuckle challenge draft. No cheat sheets or electronics are allowed to track the proceedings, just the draft board. He did it blindfolded and made just 1 error in the 21st round. There's more, but I just want to bring it all full circle, right? So in 2006, Emil created a website called MariaJulianPottery.com. Why would he do that? See if this sounds familiar. He was a hobbyist who developed a keen interest in something. In this case, the something was Southwestern Native American Indian pottery. Emil has since immersed himself in the subject and made a personal goal to support the historical preservation of the San Ildefonso Club of Tribal Artists. As part of that, he and his wife, Maria, have translated marriage records from Spanish from the San Ildefonso mission for publication. He continues to work on a book. I just got an update on that this past week from someone who's working on it with him. And that'll document the lives, promote the work, and pass along the history of those artists. Not surprisingly, his off-field activities match his reflect the same mindset he's used in this hobby, right? He's, it's who he is. I mean, find something he's interested in, learn more about it, turn it into a thing. So it's a mindset that led him here. It's who he is. And so that's a little something about Emil, kind of on the field and off the field that gives you a little idea of what kind of person he is.
Emil changed a lot of people's lives, including mine. Bob probably taught me more about fantasy football than anybody has, but Emil published one of my articles in one of his magazines. He was the first person to do that. And so here's this kid from small town Michigan, 1,200 people in town of Ovid, Michigan. And my mom and dad could go down to the local Kroger, the local grocery store, and pick up a magazine that's got my stuff in it. So literally, he changed my life, changed the direction. And to show you what kind of guy Emil was, when I decided to put this on, Dan and Kelly Grogan, who were his biggest competitors in the magazine space, wanted to come on to talk about Emil. So, Dan, Kelly, what do you have to say?
Well, the relationship with Emil goes way back. As Kelly mentioned in our earlier discussion, we started playing fantasy football in '85. And like many people, saw the opportunity to put out information, and through a magazine and other things. But I used to get calls from Emil at the house, and we would talk about fantasy. I think this was maybe about the time he was thinking about getting into the business. And yeah, I could tell he was a pretty sharp guy just because he had pretty good insight to where he wanted to go with this and all. And we had great conversations about the interest, the hobby. But I think what drove us both, and especially Emil, as he talked about people, just their obsession with the game and how, just people just loved this idea of fantasy football. And it was more than just a hobby to a lot of people. It was really a devotion to an interest they had, and they would do anything they could to learn more about it, to perform at the top of their game. One side story, years later, Emil, I called one day and he said, I'm thinking about this idea where I could bring all these people to Vegas to do this idea. I don't even know if he called it the World Championship of Fantasy Football at the time, but he had an idea for a World Championship type game. And with my great foreknowledge and insight, I said, I don't think it'll work. Well, look what happened. So Emil, I think the bottom line with Emil, he was ahead of his time, certainly.
Wow.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Kel-
The one thing
Kelly?
that I remember with Emil early on was, as we started, developing our own products and different ideas that went into the magazine, there were now some other magazines that were starting to pop up, but Emil was one guy that he really didn't worry about the competition as much because he was just going to put the best information that he could in his magazines. And he didn't worry about what was in our magazine or what was in the index or some of the other magazines out there. But we would talk about those things. And so he wasn't like, no, you can't look at my information or anything like that. But, we had many conversations about different ideas, about the industry, about, trying to even get the fringe player more involved in fantasy football and make it easier on the fringe. I mean, people today have it so easy. One of the things that people don't even realize is that back in the day when fantasy football was first starting, you had to show up with your cheat sheets. And it wasn't a cheat sheet that you could go online and print out. You had to create your own cheat sheet. And a lot of times it was, you got it from Grogan's or you got it from the Pro Football Forecast or you got it from Bob and Emil. And so, you had to walk into your draft with pages and pages of cheat sheets. And nowadays you get online, if you do an ESPN draft, it pretty much tells you who to take next or who there's no way. People were early on in a way, they didn't want to be embarrassed because they didn't want to draft someone that had already been drafted, or they didn't want to draft someone that retired. Like, well, Dan and I drafted a guy early on in our first year. Dan, you can tell the story about, we drafted a guy that had a broken leg.
No, yeah, it had worse. You had a broken neck.
Broken neck.
And,
That's right.
And he was with Seattle. He was a wide receiver. His name was Paul Johns.
Yeah.
And we saw in a publication, this is what drove us to do something about all this, and not just for everyone else out there, but for our own interests and all. But Paul Johns, fourth round, we saw this guy, Paul Johns. The year before, he had like 4 touchdown catches in 7 games. We thought, well, that's pretty good if he had played a full season. I think back then they were only playing 12 games too. And so we drafted Paul Johns, only to realize from the rest of the league that they said, haven't you heard Paul Johns is retired? He can't play any longer. Well, the fun thing about that, there was, I think, 20 to contact him. And we ran a story in our magazine, and we did call the Seahawks. And it turns out Paul Johns worked since that time when he was knocked out. He had to retire. He worked for the Seahawks in their PR department. And although we didn't get to talk with him, we got to talk to somebody there at the PR department, and they just howled about the story. And I mean, not about his broken neck, certainly, but certainly what drove us to get into the business was making mistakes like that.
Similar story about the Goppel in '78. Somebody drafted J.B. Kane, who had passed away the year before, tight end, and much to the glee of the rest of the league, who roundly criticized him. I think we all kind of got in this for the same reason. We saw, I always tell the story. A friend of mine came back from San Diego, and our little group of friends got together. Goes, "You guys, I found a thing. You're gonna love it." Right. And of course we did. It was fantasy football and we did love it. But like, it took 1 week for me to say, we don't know enough to do this right. We don't have the information we need to really, really do this right. And that's, I think, for everyone who early on thought about this as, a possible business or something, the 2 things that stuck out was, we love it. We need to know more.
That's correct.
Yeah, and Tip is the newbie here. Tip, how long have you been playing?
I've been playing since 2005. So 2005 was my first year.
All right. So how long have you been doing podcasting?
This is my first year doing it. Yeah. It's, I decided last year, this time, I was like going through my New Year's resolutions, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a fantasy football podcast. I love fantasy football. I have a lot of fun with it. I've read your magazines, and, you know, especially Football Diehards, and you know, I've come across all these publications before, and I was like, man, this is fun, and it's something I was passionate about. So I'm just excited to be on here with all of you guys because, like I said, I've read a lot of your publications, I've read a lot of your rankings and things like that. So it's really fun to see this come into fruition, and it's really fun. It's really neat to see where the beginning of it came from, because when I started, we didn't quite have it at our fingertips, like, you know, apps, so to speak, but we did have a lot of magazines. We would have guys in there with their cheat sheets going on, and now we have it on these cell phones. You could put a cheat sheet there.
We
So
didn't
it's
have
really
cell
where-
phones
where-
back in the day.
where it
Right.
started from. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember Bob told me a story from back when he was a kid. He was literally sending out flash updates via a fax machine.
I was not a kid, but I that was the first year I did it. I thought, that what's going to set me apart, right? I had an email, I had a regular mail portion, a newsletter that might or might not get there in time, right? I mean, you send it
Snail
out
mail.
as early, yeah, you send it out as early as you can. We sit there and I was like way too fancy, graphic designer back in the day, so everything had to go through the you know, to the service bureau to get printed out, the negatives to a printer to get printed and then folded and mailed. And so we get those out on Wednesday. They generally get out on time, but there was, you know, the information was already old. And so I would sit there, and there was a kid that worked back at WFAN radio in New York City that I'd met while he was going to University of Arizona. I was in Tucson. His name's Steve Cohen. He's just now stepping down as the vice president of NFL programming at Sirius. And he would call me every day. And I think he was did the Mike Francesa show back then. And he would call me, Harris, I got news. And he would run me down the list of everyone who practiced or didn't practice. And I would put that into a fax and I would send it out. The first year, I had a single phone line, and I had a computer that would send out the faxes. And the faxes were supposed to go out at a certain time. If people did not get their faxes, they would start calling to see, where's my fax? And that would crash the fax system if one of them snuck in between the faxes going out, and the faxes would get later. So I spent most of that first year sitting in a puddle of tears with heart palpitations. But then shortly after that, the next year, there was a thing called fax broadcasting that made it a lot easier. And then the year after that, one of my subscribers turned me on to the thing Dan and Kelly found right out of the chute that I wish I had known about. This thing, guy calls up, says, hey, you ever heard of the World Wide Web? I said, no, tell me more. and tell me more is what happened. And it turns out you could deliver an unlimited amount of information for $0, essentially. That seemed really appealing.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you
exactly.
could deliver it instantaneously.
Instantaneously, right.
Which is, yeah. But back to Emil. Dan and Kelly, as competitors with him, did you guys share writers? Because I know we were talking before the show, and I couldn't remember because I'm old and I forget my name if my wife didn't remind me every day. But Bob and I actually appeared in your magazine too, and I know I appeared in Emil's. That incestuous type relationship, I think, was kind of widespread, was it not?
You know, it was funny. Early on, what we tried to do, we tried to keep the magazine from like one voice type of a thing. But then as we grew, that's when, probably Emil was probably instrumental in us going out and getting other writers to, and some of the people that he's used. Matter of fact, there was a lady that would design, Bob, you would probably remember. Cassandra.
Yeah.
And Cassandra would design their magazines, but then also started designing our magazines too. So we used the same designer, and we didn't want it to look the same, so we had to change some things around. But I was thinking about one story that I know Emil always loved this story, but back in the day, some of the NFL teams they really didn't know what fantasy was. So you could actually call and talk to some people. So Dan and I, in our own fantasy league, we had Willie Gault. Now, Willie Gault was a wide receiver for the Bears at the time. And I had read a story that Walter Payton was answering the phone at lunchtime for one of the secretaries who wasn't getting a lunch break for some reason. So I needed to find out if Willie Gault was going to start that week. So I called up the Chicago Bears, and Walter Payton had a really high voice. So when he answered the phone, I was like, "Hey, Walter," and he's like, "Yeah." And I told him the story, and he laughed, and he goes, "Let me connect you to the locker room." And then in the locker room, Dan Hampton picked up the phone, and I started telling him the story, and then he goes, "Willie, come here," and he gets Willie Gault on the phone, and I said, "You're not going to believe this," but I told him the whole story, and then he goes, "I just got out of a meeting with Coach Ditka, and I'm starting." So we started him that Sunday, and he scored a touchdown. Emil loved that story. He was like, "How did you guys do that? How did you guys?" But it was just the luck of the draw at the time that the league really didn't worry about the fans calling.
It got so out of hand early on. So I started realizing that when I would call teams, I would get kind of the cold shoulder a little bit, like, we're getting a lot of calls. Right. And so it was like all of us were calling. So I would say, "Well, hey, I have an 800 number. Why don't you tell me these things? And I will tell people things. I will try to sell them something, but I'll tell them whatever you want them told." And it got to the point where I think there was like early on, the Chiefs, when Joe Montana just had gone there, he had an elbow issue. They were getting so many calls. I think one of the ladies there named her child after me. So happy was she that I took off all the phone calls. I mean, they couldn't get calls. And then a lot of the newspapers, local newspapers, the sports desk would start giving out my number too, because they got it from the teams. And so people would call the local sports desks of the various teams to try and find. We were all just so desperate for information. And that's something, I mean, whether it was Dan and Kelly Grogan, Emil Kadlec, Ian Allen at the Index, all of us, I mean, you realize that, people could not get enough of this, right? And so that's kind of what forwarded. But I want to just add on, something about Emil that, early on, as we talked, the thing that struck me about him was, this is not like, and he could have said like, "Hey, let's just promote certain people, my people." The whole idea was to get as many different voices as we could, right? And not be afraid of letting other people share their opinions and put their thoughts out there, and let your own thoughts stand up against them, right? It was, this was kind of the whole idea behind what we did. And it was essentially the whole idea of the Masters forecast in the Pro Forecast, was to get a group of people who knew things to say what they knew and share that diverse opinions, that set of opinions with the world, and let people judge for themselves who knew what. And so it was kind of I think that was kind of it's the approach we've taken ever since. And I think to what Greg said about, how much he enjoyed, having his name, an article appear in a magazine, he was not alone in that. I think everyone really got a kick out of that. People still get a kick out of that. I mean, to this day, you put someone in a magazine, it just hits home differently. And I can't tell you the number of people who have appeared in our magazines, all our magazines over the course of the years, who just feel that connection. And, you can call them on a moment's notice and they'll do whatever, because they still feel that, right? And I mean, even people like, I know Matt Donnelly's going to come on. He'll tell you the same thing. When you get those books in your hand and your name and pictures in there, it hits a little different.
It does. And I got to tell you, the very first time I was in a magazine, Emil paid me $50 for an article. Now, $50 wasn't going to make me rich. It wasn't going to break me. But the second time I went into his magazine, I told him, "I don't want your money. I want 5 copies of the magazine so I can send it to my family." And he shipped them to me. He shipped 5 copies of the magazines to me. And speaking of Matt Donnelly, the man with the best mustache in fantasy sports, Matt Donnelly has put on a very special event to help Emil and his family. So, Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Well, like so many people in here right now, I mean, Greg, you talked about, Bob talked about a little bit. I'm in that same one. Bob just mentioned that having your work published in a magazine that you can pick up at the local Walmart. I mean, it just hits differently, especially here in Northern Canada. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I felt that we needed to do something to help. Like Emil gave me that first opportunity, and I felt that there was a need to give back. And the one thing that I know about the fantasy football community is they're always willing to give back. So it didn't take a whole heck of a lot to kind of come up with an idea, because over at the Vipers, we've always put on a playoff league. We put on a regular season league. Every league we've done for charity in some way, shape, or form there. And it was pretty easy when I heard the news that, okay, you know what, we're running this league back one more time. And the outpouring of support from the community has been unbelievable, from the different companies out there that want to get involved with the door prizes. And we've got Trophy Smack donating a champ chain. We've got Reception Perception. We've got Fantasy Points, Roto Baller. I mean, I can go on and on about all these different subscription services. Football guys, they jumped in on some of these big time prizes. And we are creating a huge player list right now. Last time I checked, I think we were at 71 participants right now at $25 per entry. And every single dollar is going to go towards Emil and his family to kind of support them through their time. I think right now that's roughly $1,775 that we've raised. So, I mean, when we first put this together, the goal was 1,000, and a nice even number. But now I'm thinking, hey, we have a very good opportunity to double that. We could hit 2,000 by the time Saturday's kickoffs go. So that's kind of what we're trying to get to right now. And we've
Just
got
a second, Matt.
You
Just a second. I know I'm in that, and I know we got Wendy Early in the chat room in that, and I know Iggy's producing the show, and he's in it. Tip, are you in the contest?
Not yet, but I'm getting into it after this, after we get out.
Okay, you got to do it quick, because Matt, what's the deadline and what's the website?
I'm going to go right up until sometime Saturday. I kind of want to put the cutoff Friday night, but I will take things right up until kickoff as long as I can get that invite out there, because the more people we get in, the more support that we can give to Emil and his family there. So I'm not going to put a hard deadline until that 4:30 kickoff. So let's try and get around 2:30 maybe. It would be nice on a Saturday before I go to coach some hockey. But I mean, you talk about the community here. Jules McLean there from Fantasy Points, Joel Cox. You mentioned your guys' name, Gary Davenport, Matt Harmon, Jim Coventry, Jody Smith there, Brett Flynn, some of these big names out there. Andy Behrens, he just signed up here recently. Lindsey Rhodes there are
Jamie Eisenberg, tons of people.
Jamie Eisenberg, Howard Bender, so many big time names. It's really like the Scott Fish Bowl, but a little bit smaller there. I mean, we're not quite at 1,400 people participating, but we're at 70 people, and it's a good mix of analysts, Hall of Famers, and regular fans that all want to show their support. So great prizes, great competition, and a great cause all rolled up into one.
Go to Matt Donnelly at Matt Donnelly FF. It's pinned to the top of his X feed. So go there and you can get the link there, sign up, and also share it multiple times.
And Bob has also started a GoFundMe, which I have to say, I shared the GoFundMe link on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and was inundated with let me help you run your campaign type emails. But bottom line is, Emil is loved so much in this community that everybody wants to help him and his family. And it's the outpouring. When I signed up for Matt's contest, there were 42 people in it. And you said there's already 71. It's growing. Yep. So keep it 72. Growing right up to kickoff.
72. There we go. Tips in. Right. It's funny because you see I've seen over many, many times, right? There's something comes up and the fantasy community rises up and you see it and you're part of it. And then you don't realize the impact of it until you're on the receiving end of it. And you're going, holy cow, yeah. This is amazing. And people have been really great. You can find that GoFundMe pinned to the top of my X feed at Football Diehard if you would so desire. And look, if you can't give money, you don't have to share it.
Can I say something?
Please.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Bob. Go ahead. Finish it up.
Share it though. If you can't give it, if you just want to say hey to Emil, hit him up on his email at emil.kadlec@gmail.com because he loves hearing from people.
You know what? It's so funny. This day in a community, right? In a community, there has in other community that I've been a part of or involved in, whether it be on social media or not, you just don't quite feel the camaraderie, the love, and I know it comes from the Fantasy Expo as well. And I have not been there, but I'm telling you, like, it's really amazing to see everybody coming together, everybody, even for a cause, good cause, whatever the cause is, everybody just comes together in this fantasy community. And it's something that's really, really inspiring. And it's something that's really good to see. Since I've been in this, I'm a very new guy to it, but ever since I've been in there, I kind of felt that camaraderie right from the get-go, right from the start. So it's really, really awesome. And I just wanted to say that. And thank you guys for that as well.
Well, Tip, you're a great guy. And you folks don't know, very rarely do those of us in the business get a chance to interact with other people in the business outside of an expo or a convention. Because we're spread to diverse parts of the country. Tip lives maybe 5 miles from me. So Tip and I actually met. I met his girlfriend, Alana. He met my wife, Janie. We had dinner together. Tip stepped in. When I started this podcast, I started with Mace Riney. And Mace had some family issues where he had to take care of family first, which I'm all for. Tip stepped up and he has been steadfast since then. And so if you're not following Tip Major, at Tip Major, bring Tip back up, please, Iggy, so that they can read his Twitter handle. You should be following everybody on this. Now, Dan and Kelly, they're no longer really in the industry. Is that true, Dan?
That's correct. We've been out for several years now.
But what are you doing? What are you doing with your life?
Retired. Me. Kelly's not. But I've got a number of things to do and just activities and hobbies and, things that I wasn't able to do when we were devoting 20 hours a day to fantasy football.
Are you still playing?
You know what? I stopped right after. Well, Kelly mentioned earlier about we sold our business to Athlon Sports, worked for them for 4 or 5 years. And then right after that, I just had such a distaste in my mouth about everything. Things didn't go very well for us at the end there at Athlon. And so I quit playing for a couple of years, but then we got talked back into it and played for several years more. And then just recently I thought, I'm just not into it like I was in the beginning. And so I'll tell you, Sundays are a lot easier on me now. I don't throw up as much and watching the games. So I'm okay with it.
All right. Well, what about you, Kelly? Are you still playing?
Yeah, actually, I still play. I'm actually partnering with my daughter, who's in a league in California, and we live in Colorado. But the funny thing is that we were in the league last year and we won it, and then they came back to my daughter and said, "You can be in it, but your dad can't be in it." So I'm kind of a silent partner now. So I still play. I still enjoy it. And
Kelly, I host a league that's for free on Sleeper called Beat a Hall of Famer.
Oh.
Now, most people beat this Hall of Famer because I'm nowhere near where I used to be in it either. But I have fun with it. And I just got notified that I'm going to have one opening. So if anybody wants in, shoot me a direct message, and I will get you in. Even if I have to expand it. Now, Bob, if you come in, I'm expanding it to 2 leagues. So there's 2.
I'm good. I'm not good. It's funny though, because I mean, the number of leagues we all play in it does get a little bit intense. But just a thought on the community. If you want to know how great this community is, look no further than Matt Donnelly. We allow in people with walls of Funko Pops behind them.
That's right.
Well, but you got to, Bob. He's got the mustache. I mean, that's a
That is-
classic mustache. Look
that
at
is
that.
great.
They're my adult action figures. Ask Lisa Ann. They're my
Adult-
adult action figures.
They're great. But this, just getting back to community, it's funny because I think now, like I'm like a Hall of Famer, you're a Hall of Famer. I don't even know if we get jobs now. I mean, we're, like the level of thought and effort that goes into this, and so, the kind of people that have gotten into this industry over the course of time, it's just raised the level of everybody. And I think that was kind of the goal for Emil. And I think most of us back then, I mean, it was raising things up. I mean, if we were going to make this into a thing, we had to make it into a thing, and people had to, have visibility. And so you wanted to, fill the pool so everyone floated higher. And I think that's, has been Emil's approach all along. Let's get more people involved. Let's get more people, published and get them out there. And I think that's, when I look back at this and my time with Emil, I'm going to look back on the people who we published, the people who we, gave a platform to, who otherwise wouldn't have had a platform. It's just amazing. And I will just, Emil was on the forefront of, through the high stakes. I mean, finding out that there were women out there who were crushing everybody and adding them to the mix in the magazine. Kimber Schleicher and Jules McLean, who was playing in Matt's contest, among others, and just kept growing from there. So it's been like an amazing ride. And I think, as I think about it, look, I again worked next to Emil daily for 25 years, have known him for 30. Just knowing what his goals and desires were. First, two things: there is no quit in the man. Right. There is no, you are not going to sway him or turn him away. As as we heard earlier, I might have had the same opinion of that high stakes when it first started, as maybe Dan shared, is like, oh, do you think? But as we talked it through, we discussed, it's got to be like a real event to make it a big thing, where it's like nothing else, the food and all the things. And by golly, he put it all together, and not without a bit of risk. I will tell you, that first grand prize, I mean, guaranteeing that prize, there comes a point where you've got enough people, you got to guarantee the prize, but do you have enough people to cover the prize? It gets a little bit scary, and it was scary. And he never wavered in that. And just like, and also I want to go back to the Fantasy Sports Writers Association. It was him and me and Kirk Boyelis, a Louisiana law enforcement officer who at the time was in the business, Ryan Houston, from a place called Fantasy Asylum. We started this group up, and Emil, was the driving force behind that. Like, hey, let's have something where we can recognize the people who create this content for us, and recognize them with awards, and show them that people, show people that this is a real thing. Again, all part of making this, filling the pool a little higher, raising people's profiles and level, and turn this into a thing that wasn't just like something a bunch of people did. Like, that was always my goal, right? Like, I just don't want to look like a guy who just started doing this. Well,
FSWA.org.
right.
If you're not a member, sign up, because you can get awards out of it. It's a dual thing. Andy Behrens is now president of the FSWA, and he wanted to be on to speak to Emil, but he had a conflict come up. Joe Bryant, football guys, wanted to be. The number
Traveling.
of people that wanted to be on this, I mean, the love for this man is unparalleled. It really is. And I can't emphasize it enough. If you're not in Matt's contest, get in Matt's contest. If you don't want to gamble, look, if I win, I'm not expecting to, but if I win every one of those prizes, except maybe one, I'm going to give away. I'm not going to keep them. I don't.
You're
need
keeping
them.
the Scott Fishbowl entry, aren't you?
No,
You
I've already got
greedy ass-
that.
Oh, okay.
I've already got Scott Fish. When I got back in after retiring, Bob, I reached out to Scott. We had him on our podcast back in the day. I didn't remember that, but I reached out to Scott and I said, I hear you got this big contest going. I'd kind of like to get involved. Is it okay? He said, sure, you're in. He's got 30,000 people on the freaking waiting list, and he just put me in it. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I'm at the expo last year. Guys, if you haven't been to the Fantasy Football Expo, go. $75 for a weekend full of activities where you can meet the Bob Harrises, you can meet the people that built this industry, and you
I
can
think you should
see.
say, even though you have to meet Bob Harris and then add all the rest.
Well, Bob is Wendy's bestie. He may not know that, but he's
I do
Wendy's
know it.
bestie. I'm sitting watching a flag football game where Iggy is laying people out on the field. Des Bryant's there playing. Iggy goes down on a pass play. Iggy's playing defense, runs over the receiver. I mean, just destroys him. NFL hit all the way. And I'm talking to Wendy for an hour. She had no idea who I was. After that, I asked Wendy and a lady named Carla Hazam to help me interview a lady who ran the oldest women's only fantasy football league in the world. I started it back in the mid 90s for women only. I ran it until I retired in 2015. And then Tina Gunner took it over and ran it, has been running it ever since. Wendy and Carla, they'd never done a podcast before. I asked them to help me to make it more comfortable for Tina. We interviewed Tina. Next thing you know, Wendy and Carla, thanks to JC and Iggy, have a podcast called Game Changers, which is amazing. It's really a wonderful podcast. You guys, Tuesday nights, I think it's Tuesday nights, might be Monday. Anyway, Wendy, put in the chat when your thing is. But if you go to YouTube and you search Game Changers, you'll find it. But the people in this industry, I told people at the expo, there are no bad people in this industry that have been in the industry for 10 years or more, because every industry has good and bad people. Every industry in the world has good and bad people. But in this industry, if you're bad, you don't last. You get a reputation and you're gone. If you're in this industry 10 years, Bob Harris, one of the nicest guys you will ever meet. He will never turn you down if you ask him a question. I won't turn you down. Bob Lung, another great name there. Bob Lung puts on the Fantasy Football Expo. Well worth it. Get to it. Scott Fish, great guy, puts on a huge charity event every year called the Scott Fish Bowl. Matt Donnelly putting on this for Emil. 72 people. Let's get it up to 100, folks. Get it up to 100 people. Let's get some money for Emil's family. I'm sorry, Matt, did you want to say anything, or somebody else? I'm talking.
No, I was just going to say, like, I do all kinds of like little charity things here, and this is a lot easier on my body than waxing my chest on a live stream, which I've done. So
I've seen that.
Oh God,
this is much easier, and it's much better. Goes to a much better cause. I mean, a lot less pay. I mean, my wife and my son don't enjoy it. They're the ones that are pulling the wax strips on me, but I mean. It's just such a great cause. It means a whole lot. You get everything you could possibly want. You get that one last shot at fantasy glory. You get a piece of the pie here. I mean, there's so many good things about it. I mean, this community has been founded on, like you mentioned, the Scott Fish kind of doing what he does, and then a lot of other people just kind of following that lead. You mentioned you don't stick around this industry very good if you're a bad person. Somehow I've managed to stick around long enough right now. I haven't quite hit 10 years yet.
Shocking.
We're working on it. Bob.
It's the mustache, Matt. I'm telling you, it's the mustache.
Well,
Still
you know what?
right.
I'm surrounded by Hall of Famers here. I mean, Amel's a Hall of Famer. Bob's a Hall of Famer. Greg's a Hall of Famer. The only Hall of Fame I could possibly get into right now is the All Fantasy Football Mustache Hall of Fame. So right now, that's my number one goal. We'll worry about the rest a little bit later on how it kind of breaks down. But
Go
down there
to the expo. You can get into Canton.
Well, and see, I've been there. Luckily, like, no one's got an excuse not to get down to the expo, because I make it down from the Canadian Rockies every year, including COVID, which, by the way, that's another story for another day, trying to cross international borders during COVID just to get to a fantasy football expo. But that all being said, it's definitely the place to be there come August. I mean, you want to network, you want to meet great people, you want to meet like-minded people. That's the place to be. So I can't shout out that place enough there. You want to do fantasy football drafts? There are all kinds of fantasy football drafts, from the Kings Classic to the draft night out. I mean, there's something for everybody.
Queen's Classic was
every year.
there. I was sitting in on the Queen's Classic.
Absolutely.
Because at the same time, Gary Davenport was drafting in the IDP Kings Classic. So they were in the same room. They shared the same room. So
By the way, Matt and I
Yeah.
have the same magazine collection. I think we're like sharing. We have the same.
So Kelly and Dan, any chance that one of you guys or both of you would go to the expo next year?
I think that sounds like a lot of fun. I haven't been in a number of years, but
It's
I
a
think
blast.
I think that
Yeah,
would be
you just
that
go-
would be a fun thing.
I mean, I'm retired. I'm not writing content anymore.
Mhm.
I mean, this is the closest I get to content, and this is just talking football.
Yeah.
And I love talking football. I love talking, and Bob will tell you. Like I said, 3 a.m, several mornings. And I had a full-time job at the time.
There was a lot of that went on though. I mean, the hours of I spent on phones with Greg Kellogg, Emil Kadlec, David Dodds, and Joe Bryant, and the whole cadre back then of people who kind of rose up out of. Someone mentioned it earlier. The news groups back in the day, alt.rec.fantasy.football, where we all went in and like sharpened elbows and did Mortal Kombat with each other and argued and learned the ropes of the game. And
Bob's losing his mind
talk
because
smack.
there's rec.sport,
Whatever.
football.
It's funny because I was talking to Andrew Cooper from Fantasy Alarm a couple weeks ago on my
I
live
like
stream,
Coop.
and he was talking about the Reddit, and which I mean, I've looked at the Reddit and it looks very fun, but it reminds me of those days of where, man, if you're going to go in the crucible, prepare to do battle, people. And that was the news group back in the day, and it's Reddit now, and Coop loves it there. Not surprisingly, he dominates. But that's kind of the genesis of all of that. But being there for Bob Lung's first expo, as I was when it was like a little community center, and there was maybe, I think, pretty close to the number of exhibitors as people who showed up, and watching it grow to where it has now, it's been phenomenal. And every year I interview him at the end of the show for the Sirius radio program, and almost always make him cry. I did not make him cry this year. Very disappointed in that. I'll be working harder to do that next year.
It was a great time. And I got not just the blue. When you go there, part of the packet is they gave you a shirt, a Fantasy Football Expo shirt. Well, they had leftover shirts from last year that were black. And these were cool. So I got myself a black shirt. Now, today I'm wearing my Michigan shirt.
Oh, here we go.
Got it,
There we go.
baby.
I knew it was coming sometime today.
Well, I showed the guys before the show that I had it on. JC and Iggy knew. But yeah, you knew it was coming, man. I mean, come on. National champion Michigan Wolverines.
Let's
Not
get some
enough that
relevant.
we
Let's
beat
get some
Ohio
relevant.
State.
Let's get some relevant information out there. Nobody cares about Michigan or that Harbaugh character. Let's talk about the one and done draft. Matt.
Oh, wait a minute now. I know there's some NFL teams
I
that
don't
care
think so.
very much about
I don't
that
think anybody
Harbaugh
cares.
character.
Oh, they will, but not today. They care about the one and done draft and the strategies out there. If you haven't played in the one and done, be careful, people. You've got to first determine how you think the playoffs are going to roll out, because there's players who will play more games than others. Maybe you want to use the guys on teams you think are going to make it as far early on.
Time out, Bob. One and done means you get to use the player one time throughout the entire thing. I'm just doing that because I know there are people out there that have never played in one of these. Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Correct. So it's like, there are some strategies you might want to take with the onesie positions where maybe you stick with one conference throughout, like at the quarterback or tight end, or if we're using kicker position. So when the Super Bowl rolls around, you have somebody to play. So keep that thought in mind. But yeah, the format is great. It's a ton of fun, but your first step, if you're out there looking, and I know the question was posed in the chat there, is to chart out how you think the playoffs are going to roll out. So you have an idea of what players you want to get out of the way early, what players you want to preserve for later in the proceedings that you think, and then you sit back and hope that your predictions prove out to be true, so you have some chance to take it home in the end.
Just make sure you keep one guy from those positions available, because you do not want to go into championship week without a quarterback.
Nope.
That's true.
And that's
I just wanted to.
Go ahead.
Oh, excuse me. I just wanted to say one thing more about Emil. Emil was so instrumental in really promoting this industry. And there's a story that it happened maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. My daughter and some of her friends ended up going to Ireland, and just for like one of those quick 5-day deals or whatever. and they went to some pub and they were watching the Denver Broncos play, and they were rooting for the Broncos. And somebody, some guy in the back says, "What are you girls doing? You guys don't know anything about football." And my daughter stepped up and said, "I was born watching football." And he goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, my father and his brother started Grogan's Fantasy Football." And this guy came up to her, got on his knees and bowed down and said, I was buying your father's magazine for many years. I'm sorry I said anything. But Emil was instrumental in getting the word out to other people. And I think that's so valuable for this, not to lose sight of all that.
Oh, no. And again, the hobby is unlike anything else you will ever experience in the world. The friendships. Look at the people we got on this podcast. Okay. We got Hall of Famer Bob Harris. We got Kelly and Dan Grogan, who have, I believe, the oldest fantasy football magazine in the history of fantasy football. They ran it for years. We got Tip, who's brand new. We got me, I don't count, and we got Matt Donnelly, who's what? Matt, has it been 15 years? You said 2005?
Yeah, it's somewhere there.
18 years.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's been that long. We haven't quite hit 18. I'm not quite in that category there.
2005?
Football, yes.
2005?
I'd have to go back on my Twitter. Twitter's kind of my timeline thing there, where it says when you join. That's pretty much about the same time. I know I really got started probably out of pettiness more than anything in the industry, going back to the Scott Fishbowl. And anyone who knows my story and how I got started, I went in as Matt Donnelly fan, and I wasn't about that life. I mean, something about Matt Donnelly fan really, really bothered me. And I ended up at that point at 40 years old being like, you know what, buddy? I talked to a buddy back home here and said, we got to start that website we've always talked about. So we started the website, and about a week into the Scott Fishbowl, I go, hey, Scott, I'm no longer a fan. Do you mind if I put down a affiliation? He goes, absolutely. So I put down an affiliation, and that's kind of where the whole joining the fantasy football industry began. I can't remember what year that was, but
there was a day.
Matt is a much younger man than he appears. It's because his mustache is like 30 years older than he is.
Yeah, there was a day when men didn't think women could play this hobby. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think anybody on this podcast or listening to this podcast can speak out about what Gina Nobles did for the sports affiliation. She was top 10. She was top 5 for a long time in the Scott Fishbowl. Top 5. Now, I didn't do that. I did make the playoffs. I did survive the first round of the playoffs, but I was gone in the second round. Gina, special. Don't think that you're going to get in against some girls and just have your way with them. These women are sharp. They know what they're doing. Yeah, Bob, you've been doing this long enough.
Oh yes, it's been pretty much throughout the entire course of the time that I've been doing this. It's just people love to play, just people, right? Everyone loves to play, and everyone can play, and everyone can kind of own it and take people down. I think probably gets a little more satisfaction when people have doubts or questions about you to punish those people. I think we all have that same feeling, and I'm sure that goes for women in this hobby too. Maybe didn't initially have the respect they deserve, but certainly do now.
People used to ask me, aren't you afraid that when you tell people what you think of players, what you think of situations, that your competitors are going to use it against you? And I say, no. I said, the truth is, it's much more satisfying to beat somebody that knows what you're thinking before anybody else.
It's funny how this has evolved, though, Greg. I mean, back when we all started, and I know Dan and Kelly think the same thing. The job was finding information, right? It was finding. Now the job is filtering the information and getting just what's important to customers. I mean, who doesn't have the amount of time you have to sit out there and comb through all the power stream of information that's hitting you just on X alone. So the whole mindset has shifted, and And there, we used to talk about sleepers. There are no sleepers anymore. Everyone knows. Now we talk about them in terms of value or not value, because we're all doing this. There was a time when the off season was when I became the expert, right? I was able to get ahead. I was the person studying. Now everyone's studying. Everyone is into this. And so, now it's more about, sharing, kind of almost, I want to say, like when you're dealing with readers and people in the chats and, on the radio show, the callers, it's more, they want confirmation than they want to ask you questions, right? They want to have a conversation more than they want to ask you, here, what should I do? And I mean, you still get that a little bit, but for the most part, it's, most questions start with, am I crazy too? Right. We all get that. Right. And mostly the answers are no, you're not crazy at all. That's a really great thought. So I just think the level of play, watching it rise over the years, everyone knows what the hell they're doing. Right.
It sounds like you're a psychologist, Bob.
Okay. So
yeah, I do have a quick question, since we have some really great, people on here who have started it. What was the purpose of this? Was the purpose to get information out there for people? Was it to help people with their leagues? What was your purpose? And this is for all of you guys. I mean, Greg, Bob, Kelly, and Dan. What was your single purpose?
I'll start because I had the worst reasoning of any of these guys. My purpose wasn't to make money at it. My purpose wasn't to win. I mean, I wanted to win, but my purpose was to hear my own voice. I just like to talk. I like to write. I just wanted to hear my own opinions and then see what other people thought about them, to have discussions. I like to talk about football. I like to talk and debate with people like Bob, who, if Bob disagrees with me, he's not going to just go along. He's going to disagree with me, but he's never going to be nasty about it. He's going to give his reasoning. I like those conversations. That was my purpose. Let's go to Matt first, and then we'll go to the Grogans, and then Bob. Finish with the Hall of Famer.
Yeah, no, I just got involved there out of basically like you, Greg. I like to hear myself. I talk a lot, and I figured like it goes back to that whole Scott Fishbowl type thing there, where
you didn't want to be a fan.
I didn't want to be a fan, and I really believed what I knew was just as good or just as important information as that information that was being shared out there. And for me, it goes back, like when I do a Behind the Grind podcast, it's one of my favorite podcasts to do because I do ask legends of the industry for a piece of advice. And one of the biggest piece of advice that keeps coming up is do it. If you're going to do it, just do it. And for me, that was it. I'm like, if I'm going to talk the talk, I better damn well walk the walk. And luckily for me, it's been well received. I've been able to network enough. Bob Harris there, he was able to get me in with the mail, get into the magazine, get me on Sirius XM radio. I mean, these were all things a good old Canadian boy here from the Canadian Rockies could never have dreamed of possibly happening. It was when I got started, there's no way you could have told me that I was going to be on XM radio. There's no way you could have told me that I would have my work published in these magazines over my shoulder. There's no way I would have believed any of that. But what I did believe is the information I had was just as good as anybody else's out there. And just kind of, if I was going to do it, that's how to do it. I was just going to go put myself out there, talk football, like you said, Greg, and just put myself
Matt,
out
do you have any brothers?
Do I have brothers? No. I got a younger sister.
But you got a mom and dad, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
what did they think when you got on XM radio? Was that like when I got in the magazine where mom and dad, your son?
So it's funny because I do have people and friends that are in radio up here in Canada, but it's like local radio. And we go out and everyone's like, hey, yeah, you're the guy from the radio. I go, hey, just remember, XM Radio International, you're local. I'm the big dog here. So you just go sit down there, bud. And we just have these kind of conversations where it is different because up here where I'm at, fantasy football isn't as big as it is down south or even out in Eastern Canada. Like I'm in the prairies here and, it's hockey. It's hockey here, right? It's fantasy hockey's got a little bit of a following, but fantasy football is not as big. So, I mean, this is one of those opportunities where I had to kind of make a name for myself where there wasn't a whole lot to kind of make it. And it kind of makes me feel like some of these pioneers, when they first started blazing these trails in the fantasy football industry, there wasn't a lot of information out there. There wasn't a lot of fantasy football really to talk about when Bob first got started. Paul Charchian comes to mind, Joe Bryant, Dan and Kelly. It wasn't that big when you guys first got started. And up here in Canada, it's kind of the same. Like, I don't know a whole lot of people that listen to XM Channel 87, but here I am with that opportunity to be on there and talk football. And that's why I kind of got into it, just to kind of see what I could do and see how far I could take my knowledge.
No, I think that's great. Kelly, Dan, what about
I was
you
going to
guys?
say, I think that we found great satisfaction in helping people. And, we love to do research and find things out. And especially going back to the day when, I don't even know, there wasn't much on ESPN. There certainly wasn't, the internet wasn't there. And, we would spend time going to the library to read out of town newspapers and just trying to glean information from anywhere we could. And with the idea that, it was just such a great satisfaction to be able to put stuff out that people really liked. And we knew, when we first started this business, we had this, this idea, and we actually Xeroxed our notes that we were just going to use for that year's draft. And when somebody said, maybe other people are playing this game, and we kind of put it into a little bit of a format, typed, not on a computer, on a typewriter, and took it down. We Xeroxed 10 copies, took it down to a newsstand in Denver. And I told the guy, I said, just put these out, see if they'll sell. And he said, okay, I'll call you in 2 weeks. He called me about an hour later and said they were all gone. And that's what told us that there's something about this, and the people just needed help in playing this game. And I think that was our biggest driver.
Dan, how did you hook up with a publisher?
That's a pretty long story because we tried to publish ourselves.
Okay. I'll
and
tell you what
distribute.
then. I want to have you and Kelly back on the show in March, hour-long, dedicated to your story. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
Be
sure
happy to
thing.
do it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
because
Yeah.
I'm trying to do a series on the history, but we don't have an hour now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That's fine.
Exactly.
Kelly, you?
Well, with the same thing with that Dan was saying. Dan's actually in the Fantasy Sports Writers Hall of Fame also, so you have another Hall of Famer with you guys.
Hey, Dan.
But the name of our magazine was Grogan's Fantasy Football Analyst. So we like to analyze and put an analysis of players. And the way I always looked at it was, it's kind of like shaving off, the bad information that you don't really need, and just get down to the nuts and bolts of a player, and get that information out. And yes, as Dan was saying, we took great satisfaction that people, liked our information. And, obviously we don't have a crystal ball. And yes, Dan did throw up on Sundays, after we wrote our stuff, but you just tried to provide the best information you could, and narrowing it down and giving them hopefully, some good, clear-cut information that they can make their own decisions with.
That's great. Bob?
So, similar thing. I think, that like you love football, right? And you want to be more connected to the game you love. You can't play. You can't throw passes. You can't block. You can't tackle. You're not a coach. You're not on the sidelines calling plays. You're not an athletic trainer. You're not out there wrapping somebody's ankle. What can you do to have a connection to the game? Well, you can make up a fake team, and you can be slightly better informed than the guys in your league. And if you're slightly more informed, you're out there.
Or you guess better.
Or you guess better. Either or. I'm fine with either. I mean, and probably both, though, right? The best guesses come with a little education. So I think that's, the thing that always I found challenging is you're not fooling this audience. This is the best informed audience known to man, right? You're not sneaking anything past the gate there, right? You're selling ice to Eskimos. They know. All right. And so that's, to me, it's always been about the audience. You're kind of preaching to a choir of people who have the same interest as you. It's really not that hard because of that. The hard part is, knowing that you have to come correct and not try to, there's no faking it. You're gonna have to get it done. Also, the best part is I have an excuse every year when I don't win championships. Well, my job is helping people win championships. I don't win them myself.
That's true.
But you play in enough leagues, you do win championships.
Every now and again, I stumble across a win.
Yeah, that's right. Tip, take us home.
Well, this has been amazing time with all of you guys. You know, I've just learned a lot in this time that we spent together. But for me, the real big thing is helping people and just having fun with it. You know, Bob said it really great. He said, you know, we don't play out there on the field. We don't coach. We're not associated with these football teams, but we are associated with them with the information that we gather or that we, you know, read about or listen to or maybe see week to week trends, things like that. So it's just so much fun. So I just really appreciate all of the information, the content everybody has put out there, and I just can't wait to just keep going with this. This is so much fun. Thank you so much.
Okay, now I can't thank you guys enough for coming on. This is a tribute to Emil Kadlec show. I would like to take this opportunity, go to Matt's page, join his league, go to Bob's page, donate. If you don't have money to invest in it, say a prayer. Pray for Emil and his family. Let's send good vibes to his family. Shoot him an email. Bob gave his email address earlier. Bob, again, what's Emil's email?
Emil.Kadlec@gmail.com. That's EMIL.CADLEC. You know the Gmail part, people. Figure it out.
Okay. Just send him a note saying that thanks, because he built this industry that you all love so much. He really did. He was there at the beginning. And I want to thank all of you for coming on as a tribute to Emil. I think Dan and Kelly, especially, I was very pleasantly surprised when you guys agreed to come on. I reached out, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Oh, it's our
I
pleasure.
was pleasantly surprised. Matt, thanks for what you're doing for him. Bob, of course, you know I love you, man.
Yeah, man.
Tip, thank you. Iggy, take us home.
Unmute Iggy.
Real quick, I just want to say thank you all for joining. Thank you all for watching. We had a lot of viewers tonight. Please click the like and subscribe. But I'm not letting y'all get out of here without one question. Doesn't have to be a long one. It could be like fantasy football memory or something like that. I just want to know, Dan, I know you're not watching as much, but your Super Bowl prediction before we get out of here. I mean, it's the playoffs, people. We got
Detroit Lions, baby.
Oh, yeah, the Detroit Lions. Yeah, I knew that was coming, Greg. But for all the rest of y'all, let me hear it, okay? And then I'll get us out of here.
I'll go San Francisco over Baltimore.
Next.
I'm going to go with the Bills.
Next.
I have to go San Francisco as well. And Baltimore's a good one, but maybe the Dolphins.
Bob, did you show?
I did.
Yeah. Matt.
Okay. Matt, did you go?
No, I haven't. But since we're around a bunch of Hall of Famers here right now, I'm going to say the Cleveland Browns taking on the San Francisco 49ers, which will cement Joe Flacco not only as an elite quarterback, but as a Hall of Famer as well.
Matt, he's my week 1 quarterback in your thing because I think
Mine too.
He's going to lose to the Texans, but he's going to put up big numbers.
Well,
I think
everybody said
Flacco's already secured.
he's
All right,
already
Iggy, take us
secured, huh?
home.
Well, no, I didn't give mine.
Oh, sorry, Tip. Go
It's
ahead.
okay, Greg. So for me, I mean, everybody said really great teams. Could we say the Kansas City Chiefs still don't have a chance? They got Patrick Mahomes. Look, I'm going Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not backing down from those guys yet. Nope.
Fair enough.
Andrea says the Bills, and she's been playing fantasy football for 15 years. I saw earlier. Oh, I wanted to also say I saw Mr. Football in our chat. Mr. Football to me is and always will be David Dodds. And that goes back years.
Many years.
Iggy,
Thanks, Greg, for putting this on.